So I was in the audience for a very interesting discussion by Saves Trust this week, which was titled Towards a Return to Constitutionalism and Getting the Military Back to the Barracks. And so I wanted to add my own thoughts on that topic, because every time people talk about a return to the barracks by the military, I always wonder, a return from where? In terms of that, the framing of that question, are we in fact talking about active duty members of the military who are involved in human rights abuses, so returning them from commission of those atrocities or abuses? Or are we talking about active duty members of the military who are in influential civilian positions, such as what was accused General Nyikiaramba when he was running the Electoral Commission? Or in fact, are we talking about retired members of the military who move into influential positions, such as the Vice President, such as Minister S.B. Moyo? Or in fact, are we just talking about a movement of the military away from involvement in politics, in the way that the generals announced in 2002, for instance, that they would not salute any president without Liberation War credentials? So I always wonder, what exactly are we talking about? Or in fact, are we talking about all of these scenarios, in which case it becomes patently impossible to deal with the subject matter in any amount of detail. So I want to talk about the last element, which is the involvement of the military in politics. So I'm going to respond to this topic in the context of understanding a return to barracks, meaning that a step away from politics, and in fact ensuring that the events of, let's say, November 2017 will never happen again. Now, in addressing this topic, I wanted to first lay it out that constitutional meaning is determined by anybody who is in a position of authority. Let's remember that the courts only become relevant when there's a dispute. When parties do not agree on constitutional meaning, then the courts have the final say. But if parties agree, then you are basically agreed on what the constitution means. You have constituted the meaning, and that is the meaning that you apply, which is why sometimes you can stand up for your own, let's say, rights, or your lawyer can write a letter and actually get movement because you have agreed on the meaning of the constitution. So courts are only relevant when there's a dispute. So let's consider that that very important question. What does the constitution say about the role of our military or our defense forces? And that will help us understand whether we've got a problem of constitutionalism, or in fact it's a problem of constitutional text. Now, in order to animate this part of my presentation, I decided to look into the provisions from South Africa, because that is a constitution which has influenced ours in many ways and represents regional or international best practices in many ways. So Section 200, subsection 2 of the Constitution of South Africa. The primary object of the defense force is to defend and protect the republic. So it's a duty to defend, or really a duty to protect is what it is. Its territorial integrity, its people, in accordance with the constitution and subject to international law. So it's very clear that in South Africa, it's a duty to protect. That is what the defense forces are set up for. Now let's compare that to Section 212 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. The function of the defense forces is to protect Zimbabwe, its people, its national security, interest, territorial integrity, and to uphold this constitution. Now, those last four words, to uphold this constitution, are the framing which most people, when they are having this discussion, pretend do not exist. As I've just shown, the South African constitution does not have this framing. There's no duty on the defense forces of South Africa to uphold the constitution. They have duties to protect and defend. In Zimbabwe, the military has got the duty to defend and protect, and the duty to uphold this constitution. Now, what does that mean? And what exactly animated the designers of our constitution in order to give the military this role to uphold the constitution? If you look at the rest of the constitution of Zimbabwe, this duty to uphold the constitution is not really settled on many institutions. Certainly all elected officials are required to swear an oath to uphold the constitution. The police service is also required to do the same, but generally it's not really settled on many institutions. And where the duty to uphold arises, it's normally part of a three-part framing, where there's a duty to obey, a duty to defend, and a duty to uphold. And that framing, the use of those three words, means that the writers of the constitution understood that obeying the constitution, defending it, and upholding are actually different terms. But when it came to defining the objects of the military, we say the military is a duty to uphold. We didn't necessarily say they have a duty to obey or a duty to defend. It's a duty to uphold. Now I ask it again, what does that mean? And that's the problem with constitutional meaning when you use these words, because what we know is that the military looked at it and said, oh, we have a new duty here. We no longer simply have to defend and protect. We also have a duty to uphold this constitution, because this is a new duty. It was not there in the Lancaster House constitution. And on that basis, they said, so we are empowered to actually look at the executive and say, yo, comrades, look at that. The president is abdicating his role. You look at all those comrades around him. They were not elected. Therefore, we can actually move in. That was their interpretation. Now, you may disagree with that. I certainly disagree with that interpretation, because I do not see any enforcement provision for Section 212. But what happened was, when the military said this is what it means, that is the meaning they are fixed, and they acted on it. And it was incumbent on anybody in Zimbabwe to say, yo, comrades, you are rolling out onto the streets, but what's your basis for doing that? I disagree with your interpretation of the constitution. In fact, I'm willing to litigate. So anyone could have challenged the army's interpretation of the constitution back in 2017. But as we recall, when the army moved in, there was no such opposition to what the military was doing. In fact, when the military invited the general public to the streets to show support, the public accepted, the public embraced the military and endorsed this interpretation. So from a popular constitutionalism point of view, the general public kind of agreed, okay, there's a duty to uphold, and the military is involved in this duty to uphold. So and further to the public, the legislature, when it constituted itself, Parliament could have also said, yo, comrades, did you notice all the soldiers around? What's going on? Who deployed them? What's the authority? They didn't do that. They simply said, what are you trying to do? You're trying to remove the president? Don't worry, we'll take it from here. And if you recall, some prominent members of Parliament were actually stating that this, what is happening, is in accordance with the constitution. In other words, they were lending credence to the interpretation that had been given by the military. And at the time in 2017, it was actually outside actors. You remember regionally, South Africa, SADC, AU were like looking at Zimbabwe and like, hey, comrades, normally when there are tanks on the street like that, it looks like a coup. We are afraid you've got a coup. Should we help you because there's a coup? And people said, no, leave us alone. Including some prominent members of the legislature, leave us alone. What we're doing is in terms of our constitution. And then somebody did eventually take this matter to the courts, but it wasn't even to argue that the constitution had been violated. They went there to argue that what happened, what the military did, was in accordance with Section 212. And it's also important to know that when that case was taken to the courts, the lawyers from the other side also said, oh, you're saying that was in accordance with the constitution? Yeah, we agree. We also think it was in accordance. So the lawyers were in agreement. And so this is why the role of Justice Chiweshe tends to be overstated, that Justice Chiweshe sanitized the coup. Well, like I said before, constitutional meaning is constructed when parties are in agreement. And parties went to court, all the lawyers said, yeah, this was in accordance with the constitution. The High Court said, fine, here is your order of consent. You are in agreement. So the courts were basically reflective of what was a national consensus over what exactly the constitution says about the role of the military in these particular circumstances. And it said, yes, there are these circumstances where the military can actually move in the manner that they did. Now, after that order was issued in 2017, it could have been appealed. So yet again, a member of the public could have said, I disagree with this. This is contrary to the constitution. That did not happen. So we got to a place in which the military looked at this duty to uphold, interpreted it as they can move in on the executive, the public endorsed, the legislation more or less endorsed, and the courts also endorsed the consent between the parties. So after all that, it becomes very hollow for someone to simply say go back to the courts, go back to the barracks without addressing the constitutional and judicial basis upon which the soldiers can say we can move out of the barracks. And to me, this suggests that we may have a very unhealthy relationship with the military in how we think of them and their role. And consider, for instance, our reaction to when the military was involved in Malawi in support of the protesters. A lot of people say this is noble, but nobody says, no, comrades, go back to the barracks. The military shouldn't be involved in this. It seems to me often people are are in favor of the military as long as it supports their own cause. And it's only when when the military does not support a person's cause that a person says, yo, go back to the barracks. Now, on February 9, 2018, in a different discussion by Sabes Trust, Tendai BT actually says he thinks, on that occasion, he said he thought Section 212 of the Constitution is in need of amendment. And I agree with him. If we are talking about moving the soldiers back to the barracks, these are the sort of concrete steps we should be talking about. It's not enough for me to continue to paint the Constitution as this sort of blameless and almost perfect document which is only suffering from lack of implementation, when in fact there are people who believe they are implementing the Constitution, who we now accuse as being on the wrong side of constitutionalism, right? What does the Constitution say about the role of the military, and why does it give the military a duty to uphold? And if it does give that duty to uphold, does it need to be reinterpreted? If it does, then you must be talking about appealing that judgment of the High Court, because that judgment is still there, no one challenged it. If you're not going to challenge that, you have to talk about amending the Constitution. Why did we give the military this duty to uphold the Constitution, which you don't find in South Africa and has been used in this particular manner? So we need to be more consistent, and we need to be honest about what our Constitution says and what the courts have said. And what that means over and above is the fact that every single time we need to be as consistent as we expect the military to be. And we need to always say, no thank you to the military. We are prosecuting our own struggle. You are only there for your duty to defend and protect, even if it looks like the military is in support of our cause, even if it looks like they're in support of the Malawian cause, and even if it looks like they're in support of whatever is going to happen on 31 July, we must be the first to say we've learnt our lesson. We prosecute our own struggle. The military is not there to aid any form of activism on our part, because that has not turned well for us in the past, and there's no reason to believe it will be different in the future.